Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Steppenwolf. By Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse's novel Steppenwolf, published in 1927, is a work of German literature. The author writes about Harry Haller, a lonely, disgruntled academic, and he describes his mental state as a conflict between his human and wolf sides. The novel was first rejected and was even prohibited in the United States due to detailed details of drug use and filthy circumstances. Hesse composed the novel while suffering from despair and feeling isolated from the rest of the world. He was dissatisfied with society and contemplated suicide. The novel rose to prominence during the hippie movement of the 1960s and 1970s. The story begins with a foreword from the publisher, which leads to reading notes written by Harry Haller, whom he met when he was 50 years old. He had borrowed a room from his aunt. The novel's central character is the author's social critic. The main guy continuously challenges himself about life, and his conscience is crucial. He went to a magical theater and discovered something deep within him. Because it contains significant elements of literature, music, philosophy, politics, and psychoanalysis, the novel has a high intellectual significance. Harry Haller, a man in his 50s who lives a lonely life moving from one rent-controlled apartment to another, is the primary character. He is well known for both his talent and his lack of social skills. The reader can learn a lot about him at the start of the narrative from the landlord's nephew, who knew him as a calm and quiet tenant. He entered the room with a case of books and 2 suitcases, and despite being regarded as calm and introverted, a significant deal of sorrow could be felt within him. Steppenwolf was his name, and loneliness was a reflection of life's emptiness. After paying his expenses one day, he simply vanished, leaving behind his notes, which were eventually published by the landlord's nephew. The notes represent the life work of an elderly guy who adored classical music but was unhappy. He rarely felt like himself since he was aware that the man within him was constantly in danger because to the Steppenwolf who resided within him and represented his instinctual side. Harry began outlining his numerous treks around town, books he read, and time spent in bars. During a walk, he noticed a commercial for a door that said Magic Theater, only the insane can enter. He wanted to enter but couldn't, so he went to the bar and watched other people. After a few nights, he began to think about the theater, and then a man came in front of him, carrying a theater sign. Harry stopped him to inquire about the theater, but because the man was pressed for time, he merely left him with a worn-out book about Steppenwolf. The reader will then discover that Harry has various personas, such as a civilized man and a wolf. Suicide becomes more appealing as the previously described concept grows stronger. His hardships separated him from humans because he belonged to the intellectual and artistic species. His life narrative continues after reading the book. He lost his material goods, his mentally ill wife chased him out of the house, and the loneliness returned. While roaming across the city, he happened upon a funeral and ran into the man who had given him something intriguing to read. He asked him where he could go for a nice time, and he suggested a bar. On his way back to his flat, he ran across a university lecturer with whom he had a talk about Indian mythology a few years before. He couldn't avoid eating supper with him, no matter how much he tried. The dinner went horribly wrong. Harry couldn't keep his feelings about Goethe's painting to himself, and the hostess didn't like it. He was also repelled by some comments on some Haller's pieces, because they were his articles. At the conclusion of the terrible supper, Harry stated that Goethe seemed to be a symbol of the city's emptiness and that he was the author of the articles. He took in the surprised emotions around him and then headed to a bar where he was drawn to a pale girl with a large flower in her hair. They developed a tight relationship, and he listened to everything she said. She advised him to eat something and rest. Meanwhile, she was dancing, and when Harry invited her to supper, she left with another man. Harry couldn't wait to sit down to supper with her. Her name was Hermina, and she reminded him of Hermann, his childhood friend. When she requested him the previously described, she asked him to be simply friends and to murder her. He agreed to be friends with her but not to murder her. As he spent his days listening to jazz, a new phase of his life began. He made new acquaintances, including saxophonist Pablo and Maria, who became his sweetheart. Hermina introduced him to new acquaintances and helped him get ready for the masquerade party. He'd spent one last night with Maria, knowing it would be his last because he was meant to be Hermina's lover. He had some interests with Hermina, and she recognized Steppenwolf's impending failure because they both shared a passion: death. He had to be late for the dance, and when he arrived, he was bored because no one he knew was present. The gathering was held in multiple rooms, with Pablo performing in the main one. Just as he was about to depart, he received a message from Hermina informing him that she is in the lowest room, known as Hell, and that the magical theater opens at 4 o'clock in the morning. Harry didn't know Hermina because she was dressed like a boy. Unlike previous parties he had visited, this one was obscene. As time passed, the apartments became empty, and Pablo welcomed them to the theater. Pablo indicated that the theater has as many lounges as he likes as long as he removes his personality and laughs at the door. He began to look in the mirror at himself and laughed so hard that he killed Steppenwolf. He found himself in front of various lounges with different signage after laughing and losing his personality. He entered a realm where people and machines were fighting, and he saw his childhood friend Gustav, whom he hadn't seen since. He found himself in the corridor during the conflict, and the next lounge he entered was about developing personalities. A man, identical to Pablo, explained to him that a human's personality is made up of many others, and that his actions are determined by the sum of all his personas. To make sense, they may be placed like chessboard figures. The following lounge's subject was Steppenwolf dressage, in which a man, similar to Harry, demonstrated how his wolf can do anything people can. The wolf then had the man perform all that animals do. The next lounge was designated for Harry to meet any girl he desired. His first choice was a girl with whom he used to be in love. In the next lounge, he found himself in the final act of Mozart's opera Don Juan. Mozart vanished unexpectedly, and he found himself in front of Hermina and Pablo. Hermina had a bite under her left breast, and Harry granted her request to kill her by placing a knife there. Mozart reappeared in front of Harry and told him that he couldn't listen to Handel's compositions because the sound was terrible. Harry believed he should be punished for his actions, thus the execution was his next lounge. Hermina's core transformed into a person, and Mozart into Pablo. The tale concludes with the hope that he will one day learn to laugh. Harry Holler, he claimed to be the Steppenwolf, and his surroundings began to believe him. The Steppenwolf's story arose from his difficult existence. He had a distinct personality and led a solitary existence. His only commitment was to books. He was an art, philosophy, music, and poetry expert. Despite living in the city, Harry never got along with anyone, therefore he lived alone with a restless soul looking for home. He regarded his existence to be meaningless and unsatisfying. He dwelt on the cusp of human and wolf existence. On his 50th birthday, he even prepared to commit suicide. When Harry was visited by a woman whose photograph he guarded, he discovered a faint glimmer of light. Then he leaves his notes behind, leaving a note for the published to do whatever he wants with them. Biography of Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse was a Swiss novelist and poet of German origin. After World War II, his work was popular with younger readers who related with the major theme of many of his novels, the trails of youth, particularly creative artists, in pursuit of self. Hesse was born in Kalf, Germany on July 2, 1877. He was enrolled in a seminary as the son of a former missionary but quickly dropped out. Following that, he schooled himself through reading. He worked as a bookseller and freelance journalist as a young man, which inspired his first novel, Peter Kamenzind, 1904, about a dissolute writer. Hesse, a pacifist, relocated to Montagnola, Switzerland, during World War I. In 1923, he became a Swiss citizen. His disillusionment with the war, as well as a series of personal tragedies, caused his writing to become more focused on the spiritual search for new goals and values, as seen in his subsequent novels Damien, 1919, Siddhartha, 1922, and Journey to the East, 1923. All of which are deeply symbolic and psychoanalytical in nature. Hesse's next novel, Steppenwolf, 1927, is possibly his most inventive effort. The artist and hero's dual nature, human and wolf-like, push him into a labyrinth of nightmare events throughout the book. The sculpture represents the conflict between individualism and conformity. Hesse despised the rise of Nazism in Germany and worked against Hitler's dominance in his own manner. He had previously stated his aversion to anti-Semitism and married a Jewish woman. However, he never openly spoke out against the Nazi Party because he regarded himself primarily divorced from politics. Hesse's final work, Magister Ludi, 1943, set in a utopian future, effectively resolves the author's worries. His nostalgic, sorrowful poetry has also been collected in several books. In 1946, Hesse was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. He spent the last few years of his life composing short stories and painting watercolors. Hesse died in Switzerland in 1962 at the age of 85 and was buried in Montagnola's San Abbondio Cemetery. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.